Hey, good morning, everybody. Or actually, it's afternoon. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kate Gretzer at CCCHCANYS, Advocacy and Communications Manager, and thank you for joining our Advocacy Do's and Don'ts webinar. This webinar is for community health centers. As you know, we think it's really important for health center staff, patients, and supporters to become involved in grassroots advocacy efforts, because the actions of federal, state, and local governments have a huge direct impact, as you know, on health center funding, and it's really important for our legislators to have a strong sense of who we are, what we do, and why their ongoing support is essential, and to hear those messages directly from you, their constituents. And nobody tells the health center story better than the people that get care at health centers and who work for them. So this year being an election year, and with all 435 seats in the House of Representatives up for grabs, we're going to be hearing more and more about this in the coming weeks, and so we thought it would be a good time to review what community health centers as not-for-profit 501c3 entities are and are not legally allowed to do when it comes to advocacy-related activities. And so we are happy to have Elizabeth Klosnick, who manages the Grassroots Advocacy Program at NAC, here with us today to talk more about this and really walk us through things to look out for, pitfalls, and things that we should feel comfortable engaging in with regard to advocacy. So take it away, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks to everybody who is on the call and the webinar today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Everybody on the phone is muted, so if you have a question, we'll be using the chat box today. I want to avoid any excess background noise or feedback, so feel free at any point to type a question in the chat box, and Kate and I can field those as appropriate. And then, of course, we've left some time at the end for questions as well. And the other thing is we are recording this webinar, so if we're going too fast through a slide and you didn't quite get to write down or catch everything we said, you will absolutely have the opportunity to go back and review both a copy of the slides as well as the full recording of the webinar. And hopefully we'll get that turned around within the next 48 hours. So I wanted to start off with a quote by Eric Hoffer, which is, "The only way to predict the future is to have the power to shape the future." And so when I think about where does our power as an advocacy network and as a movement come from, it's from each of the individual 175,000 people that are part of the Health Center Advocacy Network. And boy, wouldn't it be amazing if every single one of those 175,000 folks took action and to support health centers and to urge members of Congress to do the same. And not only just members of Congress, it's your state elected officials, your city and other local reps as well. It's really one of our goals at NAC to provide, obviously we're always going to be providing the federal, backdrop and information, but all the tools and resources we have for advocates are meant to be taken and changed and tweaked and made your own for your advocacy efforts at the state level. And I know CCCHCANYS has some really, really awesome resources as well, but take them and make them your own, and that is our intent. So with that, we will jump right in to, again, as Kate mentioned, we're having this webinar sort of at the most opportune time with elections coming up. This is the perfect time to talk about some of those do's and don'ts and the guidelines. And so this is just a quick overview. I'm not going to get into the murky details here. But again, as Kate said, every House seat is up this year, and there are also 33 Senate seats that are up. And then there are a couple of special elections, 3 House races, and then 1 Senate race in Mississippi. And there were a couple of other elections this year that have been resolved. There were, I think, 4 House seats and 2 Senate seats that were open, but one of each, the elections have already taken place, and they've got a new representative and senator. And this slide and the next slide are just a map from roll call about the possible, flip or the seats that are up both in the House, and the next slide is going to show you the Senate. And so it's hard to see on this screen because the text is so small, but this is sort of their prediction of, which seats are sort of closer. The lighter you get, the less sure roll call is of how that seat's gonna go. So we've got a pretty tight margin in the House here, and then not as close of a margin in the Senate. So as you can see just from this map, Democrats are going to have to get more seats to make it a more even split in the Senate. So again, you can go back and review these maps, and if you have any specific questions about the election, I can certainly handle some of those. Kate can help you out, and our Federal Affairs team is, of course, always willing to provide input as well. So this is a handy chart that is sort of an average. It doesn't represent every health center, but it's a good, visual about why advocacy has to matter. And the pie chart is all different income sources for health centers. And again, each health center is different. Your pie chart's not going to look exactly like this. But when we talk about lobbying and advocacy, so many pieces of that pie are, government decisions, funding, whether they be federal, state, local, or any other grants that you might have from a governmental body. And with that percentage, more or, up to or more than or at 75%, we can't afford not to engage with those policymakers, because if we are not at the table, we're going to be on the table. And so if you take nothing else away from today's presentation, as I put in bold at the bottom there, you can't use any federal funds to lobby, and you can't participate as a health center organization or as a representative of the health center in any partisan politics or political campaign activities. But certainly lobbying and advocacy are allowed and a big part of what you can and should be doing. So if there are any visual learners on the phone, I am one. So I put this kind of graphic together just to show you how the different pieces fit under that larger umbrella of advocacy and what we think of as advocacy. So you've got first that educational piece, which is really just foundational and basic, 101, educating your folks on what is a health center, why is this program different from other providers, what makes health centers so valuable and so different. That's the educational piece. Then you've got legislative activity, which also known as lobbying, and then under the lobbying piece you've got direct and grassroots. And so in the next couple of slides I'll go through each of these and what exactly they are pretty quickly, not to belabor the point, because I think we all know what these are, whether or not we're aware of specifically what they're called and what the limits are can be a different story. So again, that educational piece is meeting with, calling, emailing, whatever communications to legislators or their staff to educate them about your health center or the impact of issues on your health center. So again, that's things like Health Centers 101, the fact that the health centers are governed by a majority consumer board. We are required to provide services to everyone, regardless of ability to pay or income. Those types of things. Even something like, wow, we're facing a 70% funding cut. Here is what that means for us. If you, divorce that from any ask, that is also educational advocacy. And things like that are unlimited in the amount that you can provide. So, just the basics, that is the foundational piece, and there is no limit to educational advocacy. And then before we dive into lobbying, just a quick note, again, as we are in an election year, just highlighting the difference between lobbying, which is allowed within certain limits that we'll go through, and then political campaign activity. And again, that is not one of those, you shouldn't do this, it's you cannot do it, otherwise you risk your 501c3 status. So just wanted to lay out the actual definition of lobbying, which is advocating the enactment or defeat of pending or proposed federal, state, or local legislation. And in the last couple of years, folks have added even in concept to the official definition. And so what that means is, as we are in increasingly murky waters and Congress is stalled and nothing's really going through, issues and various, I would say, legislative vehicles no longer need to have a bill number or an official title or to have been introduced in order for your work on them to be considered lobbying. You know, when we were back in the fall, before the CHIME Act was officially called the CHIME Act, any efforts to influence your representatives and senators to support that were considered lobbying. You know, before we had the Bipartisan Budget Act, any of our efforts to fix the cliff and saying, you know, hey, Representative so-and-so, you know, we really need your support. We need to fund community health centers. Even though you're not referencing a specific piece of legislation, your efforts are still considered lobbying. And again, that is okay. You are within your rights to do that, and you should be doing that. But just a heads up that, you know, even if you are not referring to HR2, you're referring to a concept, that is still lobbying. And then just a quick sort of demarcation between direct and grassroots lobbying, and I always illustrate this one with an example of a call to action that you would either receive from us or from CCCHCANYS. The email that you get from us that says, hey, advocates, here's, you know, the issue today. We need you to pick up the phone and call your senators. We on the NAC side are doing the grassroots lobbying, which is communicating with you all, the general public. And then when you take the action and pick up the phone, send the email, you know, set that meeting, you are doing the direct lobbying. So hopefully that distinction is clear. And again, most advocates are doing both of these things. They're both within bounds. And just wanted to make that distinction so folks realize what the difference is. So this is, again, the tax law definition of direct lobbying, and I'm not going to go through all of these things, but good for, you know, review and to have in your toolbox to refer back to. And same thing for grassroots lobbying. Couple of exceptions here on the lobbying piece that I think are fairly common, and I did want to go through. The restrictions on lobbying do not include actions by executive, judicial, or administrative bodies. So an executive order, for example, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, but it's not coming. But any work on those particular initiatives do not fall under the lobbying limits. And again, the second bullet here is more of that educational piece. Providing the objective, nonpartisan information is not lobbying as long as there is not an ask attached to it. And then there is another note here. Certainly you can't use your 330 federal grant funds to lobby. In some cases, you may be able to use state funds, but it is worth checking with Kate and with others at CCCHCANYS to find out what the rules are in New York. The rules are different in every state, and so I can't put a blanket statement and say, well, you know, this kind of a grant is always safe, or this kind of a grant is not safe, or this money is good to go. It is certainly worth doing your homework, especially when you are talking about grants at the state level, to figure out if there are any restrictions. A couple of things about political campaign activity, again, especially important as we are in an election year. So your organization and anyone who is affiliated with it, using their title, their role, their affiliation, cannot do any of the things on the slide here. So that's financial contributions to a candidate or party, that's contributing your time, making phone calls, going door to door. Officially endorsing or promoting specific candidates, any activities that appear to favor or disadvantage a candidate. I think where things get murky, and there are a lot of gray areas with, you know, the implications of advocacy and the legalese side of things, unfortunately. Sometimes appearances are more important than the, you know, the legal technicality of what you are or are not doing. And, you know, if somebody were to call attention to a particular practice or event or something that you've done, even if you are technically legally in bounds, sometimes the damage done by that, you know, the appearance and the perception will carry on, you know, far longer and be way worse than, you know, trying to prove, you know, the legal technicality of what you're doing. So Again, there are a lot of gray areas, and we are more than happy and we welcome your questions and your input on if there's a specific instance at your health center or in the community that you need some help and guidance with. We're here to help and help you navigate that. But again, participation can sometimes be viewed as intervention, even if you are just showing up and not really, contributing or, saying much. Sometimes even just showing up to an event can be viewed as intervention and is not allowed. So just a couple of examples of violations of the political campaign activity rule. I think the most severe, obviously, would be revocation of your organization's 501c3 status, and then some, I guess, lesser but equally serious violations would result in an imposition of an excise tax on the amount of money spent. So that could be anywhere up to 25%, for the money that you've spent on political campaign activities. And something else, also cost disallowance. So you would have to repay any money spent improperly on these activities. The question came into the chat box, and it's a great question, and certainly worth repeating multiple times throughout this webinar, and just to keep in your back pocket. As a private citizen, not using your title or your affiliation or invoking the health center's name at all, you are absolutely allowed to participate in political campaign activity. So feel free to donate and make those phone calls and go door to door, but you have to completely divorce yourself from your role as a health center employee, as a board member, any of that. You've got to take your health center hat completely off to participate in those activities. But yes, as a private citizen, you are absolutely able and encouraged to do that. So if you can't use your 330 grant funds for lobbying, what the heck can you use? So again, we're back to that same pie chart, and the green check marks are the funds that you are absolutely allowed to use and that are inbound to support your advocacy and lobbying activities. And again, you'll notice that I did not put a green check mark over the state because, again, every state has different rules, and so you're just going to have to make sure you're inbound with whatever the New York rules are. But really, it's only that federal 330 piece that is completely off limits. And if you are not a visual learner, here is a list of all of those things that were in the pie chart that are not your 330 grants. And now just a quick review of the two main tests for lobbying limits. And I am not a lawyer, so I am not going to dive into the weeds here, but I'll just give you sort of the overview of these two different tests. And then certainly if you have specific questions, we can handle those on a case-by-case basis and get you straightened out. But the two big tests are the substantial part test and the expenditure test. And I'll start with the expenditure test, which is pretty simple and easy. The line in the sand is that orange text there. It's up to $1 million a year can be spent on advocacy and lobbying, and not a penny more. And I will share with you, NACCC does not even spend $1 million on lobbying, so if your organization is coming somewhere close, please be in touch with us, because I'm sure there's some kind of accounting issue happening and that you're not actually spending that much money, but we do need to get that straightened out, because that is a hard line, that $1 million. And then the substantial part test, what it really boils down to is if at some point your organization decided that you were going to sort of stop providing primary, behavioral, dental, vision, all of that good care and become a lobby shop, then lobbying and advocacy would become a substantial part of what your business is doing. And again, that's a hard line to cross as well. I've never come into contact with a health center that's really, been on the fence here or close to having advocacy become a substantial part of their work. But again, even though these lines are hard to cross, it is worth knowing where they are so that you can make sure you are inbound always. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we will help you navigate the situation. So as social media gains an ever greater presence in the advocacy sphere, we've had to sort of develop policies and different guidance for use of advocacy and social media. So because it is getting to be a more popular, I would say, part of advocacy, and your elected officials are using Facebook and Twitter much more, it's worth spending some time on. But again, because it's such, I would say, relatively new technology, some of the rules and limits are unclear and they're evolving. And again, this is another space where we're more than happy to help troubleshoot in a gray situation. So any personal use of health center resources will be attributed to the center, even if you are on your personal profile. So if you're on your personal profile on a work computer during your work hour posting something, technically that has to be accounted for under the health center's lobbying and advocacy time. So then again, some social media and lobbying rules and guidelines. Same limits apply. Any of your online or digital advocacy efforts do count towards your lobbying limits. Again, there's a distinction there between direct and grassroots. If you're pushing out a call to action, that's the grassroots advocate, or that's the grassroots lobbying piece. And then again, if you are directly posting or tagging a member of Congress, that's the direct lobbying piece on social media. Let's see. And again, you have to consider the political content. I think you would certainly want to stay away from reposting or sharing anything from an organizational page that could be considered partisan. And again, there is a lot of gray area here, so you certainly want to have a social media policy in place. We have templates for that, and you can certainly tweak that to meet your needs, just so that folks, your colleagues and your board members and others who are affiliated with your organization are clear on what is appropriate for social media pages. And again, you are going to have to distinguish between someone's personal profile and someone's professional profile. A lot of people have combined personal and professional. And I do want to say, from a legal standpoint, even putting a disclaimer at the top of your page that says, retweets do not equal endorsements, that doesn't really cut it in terms of, covering yourself in a situation where you might get called out for posting something partisan or engaging in political campaign activity. So it is important to either have two completely separate profiles, or to make it clear that this is your work profile, and make sure that it is clean and it is sort of down the center in terms of what is allowed and not allowed. In terms of blogs, again, the content, even if it's by a guest blog poster, is attributed to the organization. Comments on blogs, usually not attributed to the organization. But again, I think that's where you want to include something about that in your policy. Guest posts are likely okay, but again, I think that would be attributed to the organization unless you have made it clear somewhere else, that this person is not acting as a representative of your organization. Facebook and Twitter, that's an interesting space as well. Friending may signal approval, and I think where it gets tricky is in an election year when you've got someone's official, your sitting member of Congress, they've got their official Facebook page, for their, congressional seat, and then as every single person is up this year, there are going to be 435 campaign profiles, more than that, but 435 campaign profiles, and you as an organization want to stay on the side of friending and liking and following only the official profile. Because the minute you start engaging with a campaign page, that's where you are seen as intervening in a political campaign. So absolutely, you're welcome to like and friend and do all of that with the official profile, but avoid the campaign profile. Let's see. Yeah, I think those next couple of bullets are covered here. So I did have a question that came into the chat box, and I don't want to go too far past before I address it. So the question is, are you saying that staff who are on our 330 budget are not allowed to take action on alerts while at work? And so the distinction there is, if a person is fully funded by your 330 grant, then technically no, they cannot advocate while at work. I know that is the case for a small number of people, and those folks who are fully funded by the 330 grant do have to take action and engage in advocacy on their own time. So hopefully that can look like somebody who sends an email at 8:55 or 5:05 or on a lunch break or something like that. But the majority of cases of folks, they might be majority funded by 330, but they have other funding streams that support their salary or their wages. And so really this becomes an accounting issue where every month or every quarter, that's when you're going to sort of total up all of those 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes there, and attribute that advocacy and lobbying time to whatever other funding stream they have supporting them that is not 330. But again, if you are fully 330 funded, then technically you can't lobby and advocate on work time. But I know that's come up a number of times, but again, you also might want to think about, and this can also involve the board too, creating maybe a separate fund for folks who are in that position, but allocating 1% of their salary and of resources for them so that they can engage, and that it's not technically part of the 330 grant. And I know that there are boards and health centers that have addressed this in a variety of ways, that being one of them, to make allowance for this. But again, if you have specific questions about that, I'm more than happy to help, but that is a great question, and hopefully that distinction is clear between someone who's fully funded and someone who has other funding streams that can support their advocacy and lobbying activities. So in terms of voter registration, this is a big one, again, because I know folks are getting really excited and get out the vote efforts. I'm seeing ads for that online and social media. Yes, absolutely. Health centers can and should be providing voter registration. The drives must be designated to educate the public about the importance of voting and certainly cannot be biased or partisan in any way. You as a nonprofit may target your registration efforts, and there's the next slide kind of goes through what the do's and don'ts for the targeting are. But again, you have to provide the information in a very educational, impartial way. You can provide information on all candidates and political parties that have a vested interest in health center issues. You can conduct a candidate forum, and the only thing really, the restriction there is you have to invite every single person who's running for that particular office. Republican, Democrat, any third parties, everybody has to be invited. Not all of them have to show up. So, and this is where documentation becomes important. So if you're hosting a candidate forum and only, only Republicans show up, that's fine, as long as you can document that you have invited every single person, but only the Republicans took you up on it. So having that documentation, whether it's a copy of a hard copy letter you've sent out, or keeping emails in a particular folder that you can point back to, that's going to be really important, especially during political campaign season. So let's see here. And this is just the PAL that talks about federally qualified health centers and voter registration, if you want to read the official language on that. And so here are those guidelines about targeting registration drives. So in terms of a target group, you can target historically disadvantaged populations, which again, largely the folks that health centers are already serving. But you can't target ideological groups, and hopefully that's pretty obvious. In terms of a geographic area, You can target it because it has a historically low voter turnout, but you can't target it just because it has a close race. And then in terms of get out the vote, again, the drives have to be designed to educate the public about the importance of voting and can't really show favoritism or bias. And working on behalf of a ballot measure is absolutely okay, but of course it does still count towards your direct lobbying limits. So I have a couple of scenarios here, but I did see a couple of questions come into the chat box, and I will address those. So the first question is there an easy way to track staff time on advocacy? For instance, when we send out an alert to contact representatives, is that generally a 5-minute task? Do we need to ask people to track their time on this? Yes, folks do need to track their time on this, and I think, you know, for a phone call or an email, 5 minutes is probably great. And again, I tend to do mine in quarterly chunks so that I'm not having to account for, 5 minutes during a particular pay period, but, an hour or two every month or every quarter is really, I think, probably a good way to do that, just, again, so you're not splitting hairs when it comes down to however many minutes you're doing every week or every 2 weeks. But I think, yeah, an estimate is probably the best way to go. And if there's somebody central, an advocacy coordinator, or maybe your HR person who wants to collect all of that information and store it somewhere, or if there's some kind of a spreadsheet that folks want to use that's in a centrally accessible area to log time that has to be accounted for outside of your 330 grant funds, then then I think that's great. And however you want to set that up, but yes, folks do need to be tracking their time on that. Next question. What you were saying seems to contradict messages from NAC. An organization that has over 1,000 employees, about a quarter to a fifth of them are fully funded by your 330 grant. Yes, something like that would be very difficult for one person or even a couple of people to do the accounting for. And so we can absolutely help you think through some creative approaches to this. I think that's another one where there are probably some best practices, but let's talk offline, and we can help you, create an accounting mechanism that works for your specific situation. So again, we are always happy to come up with creative solutions to problems offline. So let's go into some of these scenarios. So we've got a couple of scenarios here, and going to just ask folks to think about which category the activity or the visual falls under. Is it something that you think would be high risk, some risk, or low or no risk? So the first one is this graphic, which says exercise your right to vote. And just think about which category you would put that into, red, yellow, or green. And the answer to this one, hopefully you got it right, is red, solely because of that donkey clip art in the middle. That, even though it is not the official donkey graphic of the Democratic Party, it is certainly meant to have your mind head in that direction. And so even though the exercise your right to vote is sort of benign and more of that educational piece, having that donkey on there puts this in the red territory. So this next one is vote, it's your business. So just take a couple of seconds and think about which you would put that into, red, yellow, or green. All right. So this one is yellow, which essentially means it's in a gray area of advocacy legalese. And the piece that makes it yellow rather than green is that business piece. So for example, if the race in your particular area focuses a lot about small business, or one of the candidates you know, part of his campaign or her campaign has been that, you know, they are a local business owner or something like that, where it's a little bit more forefront and a little bit more specific to the race in your particular area, then that's where it goes into the yellow territory. You know, if you were just, you know, if that piece of it wasn't really an issue in your area, then this might be green for you. But again, certainly want to consider how this appears and the perception of this message, you know, when taken into account with all of the other machinations of the race. So this last one. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but it's a ballot taped, or a little, you know, fake ballot taped to a telephone pole, and it says vote or shut up and do what we say, and then the text says your voice, your choice, vote on Tuesday, November 7th. So take a second and think about if that's red, yellow, or green. All right. So the answer to this one is green, because truly there is no, you know, there's no message, there's no imaging that makes your mind go to one particular party or the other. It's a little bit cheeky for sure, but it is strictly educational. There's really nothing on here that could get anyone into any trouble. It's informational, it's educational. So that's why that one is green. So the next couple of slides are scenarios. Some of these are real-life scenarios that I actually was handling about a week or two ago, and some of them are ones that we hear all the time. So this first scenario is, our senator voted to fix the funding cliff and is running for re-election. We want to thank her for her past support and encourage her to support us again this year. Can the Health Center make a contribution to her re-election campaign? And the answer to that one is hard no. Again, I think this one is pretty obvious given some of the rules we've been through already. Health centers or anyone acting as a representative of a health center may not support or oppose candidates for elective office, even if it's, you know, really seen as a thank you and please continue to support us moving forward. The health center and anyone acting as a representative cannot do that. If you, as an employee, feel so strongly to write a personal check to your senator's re-election campaign, absolutely you can do that. But you have to do that on your personal check, and you can't identify yourself as a representative of your health center. Second one, our congressman is running for re-election. Can we, using the health center's organizational social media accounts, like, friend, follow, his campaign profile and accounts on social media? And again, that one is no. Affiliation with candidates' campaign profiles can be seen as implicit endorsement. So you definitely want to stick with the official page of your member of Congress. Third one. Our health center is hosting a candidate forum this summer. We invited all 10 individuals running for the open house seat, but only the Republican candidates confirmed and accepted. Do we have to cancel the event? And this is a real-life example that I fielded, and again, we sort of went over this one. No, you do not have to cancel. You've done your due diligence. You have invited everyone. And again, this is a situation where your documentation is going to be extremely important. Because it's the people who feel like maybe they weren't invited or they missed it and they didn't participate who are going to call you on it. But as long, again, as you can produce that documentation to say, hey, no, we invited you, you just chose not to participate, then you should be okay. But it's also probably a best practice, a good practice, to post a statement of nonpartisanship somewhere on your website. And this will be extremely helpful, too, in cases where you are surprised. And I would say for advocacy leadership program and other legalese trainings that we do, in the past we've used the example of Hillary Clinton announcing her candidacy for president on the steps of a health center, and that was completely out of left field. No one was expecting her to do that, and so having policies in place and statements on your website up front help to minimize some of the damage control that you would have to do after the fact in an event that something like that happens. And again, we have sample statements that you can post so that, when you're arranging tours or visits or other events, folks know at the get-go that this is not a place where they can stump, this is not a place where they can pass out campaign t-shirts and buttons and stickers. This is truly an educational visit. And then again, if something crazy happens, you are as covered as possible ahead of time and can point to all of these different things that you had in place to try to prevent that. And then, of course, you're still going to have to do some damage control, put out a statement, all that good stuff. But the more you can do to be prepared ahead of time, the better. Again, another real-life example here. Township trustee who sits on our board is up for re-election this year, and she recently put up signs on clinic property promoting both her candidacy and that of several other city council members. There have been several postings on the clinic's Facebook page suggesting that this is inappropriate and endangers our 501c3 status. What should we do? And again, hopefully this one was pretty cut and dry. You've got to take those signs down immediately. That placing signs, even though it was both that specific individual and other people, still counts as intervention in a political campaign, and that is not allowed. And again, this is another situation where I would be sure to have a statement of nonpartisanship up somewhere on your website that you can point to. And I think in this particular case, a public statement about what happened and what you've done to rectify it will be very important in sort of some of that damage control space. So a couple final takeaways here. Always be nonpartisan, and a quick note that nonpartisan is not bipartisan. The Health Center program has enjoyed bipartisan support, both sides of the aisle, for 50 years. Here's to 50, at least more years of bipartisan support. But any advocacy and lobbying activities have to be nonpartisan, meaning apolitical. Timing is everything. The IRS does look at facts and circumstances of each case. Again, so seemingly small things can have a huge impact. Perception is, what is that statistic? 90% of reality. So again, be careful about appearances. And this seems, seems simple, but when in doubt, get advice beforehand on some stuff. Again, NAC team and CCCHCANYS always, I'm volunteering Kate and her team, but we're always happy to help troubleshoot and help you navigate situations. Elections do matter to the future of health centers and the health of health center patients. That is a no-brainer. The populations least likely to vote are those that health centers serve, and you're in the best position to support and encourage voter registration and civic engagement just because you have that trusted relationship with your patients. And these efforts can make an impact. There are some stats here. In 2008, between 910,000 and 3 million votes were lost due to registration problems. And back in 2000, that was almost double. It was 1.5 to 3 million votes were lost for the same reason. So getting out the vote campaigns and voter registration drives are super, super important. But again, just have to be careful of the lines so that you don't cross them. Our website, hcadvocacy.org, has a legalese section for this information and more. We've got some Q&A and some policies that were vetted by our lawyers about lobbying and political campaign activities. We've got that statement of nonpartisanship template that I mentioned. We've got a sample policy on social media that you can take a look at. And if there's something that you need that you don't see there, of course you can always email us at grassroots@nac.org for help or with any other questions. So with that, I will open it up to any other questions. I haven't seen anything come through the chat box, but feel free to take the next couple of minutes and type them in now. And Kate, you can feel free to add, anything that I missed as well.
I don't think I have anything to add. This was a very thorough and fantastic presentation.
Fantastic. And yes, I can send Kate a copy of this presentation, and I will also share with her the recording once I get it back from our IT folks, hopefully by the end of the week.
Yeah, I do know a few individuals have already reached out asking if a recording will be available, and we can share a link to that in our, once we have it, in our Advocacy weekly newsletter as well, so people can refer to it after the fact, and we'll post it online.
Perfect.
you seeing any questions come through? I'm not seeing any.
No, I am not.
Okay, quiet group today.
Let's see. Okay, just got one.
Okay.
What about co-sponsoring a candidate forum with another 501c3? Do we need to make sure that all candidates are invited, even if we are not the lead sponsor? And if that other organization is a 501c3, the same rules still apply. They have to invite everybody. And I would say, even if you're not the lead, and perhaps if the organization that you're working with is not a 501c3, still a good practice to invite everybody. And I would say, you know, that's a place where I would step in as a co-sponsor and say, hey, this is a restriction or, you know, a rule for us. Would be really great if you could honor it, because we have, you know, we have to abide by IRS rules and things like that. So especially if the other group's a 501c3, yes, but a best practice no matter what.
Great question. I look forward to getting invitations to all of these forums and events you guys are planning. Hopefully during National Health Center Week. Which, since I just mentioned National Health Center Week, Elizabeth, when is the webinar, the kickoff webinar for that? I just want to put in a little plug. It's next week, am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. That is a great plug. It is next Wednesday, the 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we are actually going to send out a blast tomorrow to the whole Advocacy Network to remind folks, if you haven't already RSVP'd, it's not too late. And actually, Dorian may have already sent that out, so it might be in your inbox now. But yes, next Wednesday, 3 p.m.
Very good.
Yep, I haven't gotten any other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this was a great presentation, and we'll be getting it up online soon for folks to access. And as Elizabeth said, any other questions you may think of, please feel free to shoot me or her a line, and we will get right back to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kate. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Yep, bye-bye.